Acthung Doctor. Just weeks after we'd moved into Hildegard's apartment, I started to feel unwell. It began on a fine morning in June, after I'd finished a shift at work. A German colleague dropped me home, and after waving him off, I was hit by a crashing headache and a wave of nausea. By the time I got up the 2 flights of stairs and into our apartment, the pain was excruciating. It was like something savage had stuck its fangs through the top of my head and was sucking out the contents. My skull felt as if it was being crushed and my cheekbones being dragged up to meet my eyes. Then suddenly I couldn't breathe. Something had turned off all the air. As I shook in silent terror, I saw strange red pulses of blood shooting through a vein in my index finger. I wondered, was I going mad? I thought I was about to pass out. I'd never experienced anything like it before. Then, in less than 30 seconds, it stopped as abruptly as it began. I started trembling for ages afterwards. Whatever had happened was brief, but it frightened me enough to make an appointment with the doctor that day. I found the GP surgery on the ground floor of a modern apartment block on a manicured residential street of Bremen. Dr. Wolfgang Wortig-Hoffmann was a distinguished-looking man in his 50s, with steel-rimmed spectacles. He leant forward on his desk and considered me carefully behind his steeple of fingers. "Do you think you could be homesick or anxious?" he asked. "It sounds like you had a panic attack, or perhaps an asthma attack." I was skeptical. "I don't miss home, and I don't think it was a panic attack," I replied. "I've never had asthma before in my life. I don't think I've ever felt anxious before either, but I do now." "It seems you've had a panic attack," he said. "The symptoms you experienced seem very real, and it's very frightening, but it's also very common. I'm going to prescribe some anti-anxiety medication for you. You're going to be fine." I was happy to accept his assurances. After all, I felt ridiculous being in a doctor's surgery. Of course I was fine. I was a healthy 23-year-old, for God's sake. I'd rarely been inside a doctor's surgery, and I've never been in hospital in my life. In fact, a diagnosis of a panic attack came as a relief, because I wanted to believe that there was nothing physically the matter with me. "Maybe I am stressed, being in a new country, but I just didn't realize it," I said. The relief I got in the doctor's surgery didn't last long though, because within days I was sick again. This time the thundering headaches came back in waves that lasted hours at a time. "Did you try an aspirin or a paracetamol?" asked David. "I've tried everything. I was up half the night with headaches and feeling sick," I said. "I'm exhausted from lack of sleep. I just don't know what to do." I couldn't even tell him about the eerie silence I started noticing in my head too. It was too difficult to explain, and he might think that I was mad. This silence was so loud that it seemed like it was taking over my head. I began to wonder if, perhaps, I really was going mad. One night at work, I looked so ashen that an older German colleague called Anja Baumann urged me to go to the hospital. "I think you're right," I said. "My doctor isn't listening to me. I'll go to the hospital after my shift is finished." She directed me to the Central Krankenhaus in Bremen by train. I expected a long wait, but there was a world of difference between this hospital and the overcrowded A&E departments back home. After taking a seat in an almost vacant waiting room, I was seen within minutes. "What exactly are the symptoms that you're experiencing, and what medications are you on?" the A&E doctor asked. I listed off my afflictions and told him that my doctor had only prescribed me with anti-anxiety medication. The doctor took me behind a curtain and tested my reflexes by tapping my knee with a rubber hammer. He looked into the back of my eyes and checked for weaknesses in the muscles of my face, eyes and tongue. He ordered me to follow simple commands like to close my eyes and touch my nose. Then he gave me a clean bill of health and told me to go back home. "You seem like a perfectly well young man," he said. "There is nothing seriously going on. Take an aspirin for your headache and you'll be fine." "I've taken aspirins. I've taken everything," I said. "I'm like this for weeks now." The doctor was dismissive. "You need to give the anti-anxiety medicine time to work. Stop worrying. You'll be fine." He might as well accuse me of inventing or imagining my symptoms. I held my aching head in my hands on the way home on the train. I felt hopeless and wrecked. I did not know who to turn to next. As the weeks wore on, the headaches and nausea escalated, and I felt progressively worse. My eyes had trouble focusing, and I felt lightheaded, but I was weighed down by exhaustion. Then, days after that hospital visit, I experienced the most terrifying episode of all. It was hot, humid July evening, and yet my skin prickled with beads of cold sweat. I felt I might throw up everywhere, so I asked to leave work early. My line manager, Herman, raised his eyes. I felt miserable enough, but it made me feel worse when my colleagues thought I was skiving off work. I hardly made it to the front door of the apartment. I was lathered in a cold sweat by now, despite the oppressive heat and a struggle up 2 flights of stairs. This time, the headache had a savage intensity. My skull felt it was being crushed in a steel vice. The left side of my face and left arm were numb. I stripped off my sweat-soaked clothes in my room and slumped onto the bed. I sat panting, trying to cope with the searing pain in my head, when I began feeling the strangest sensation. My tongue was growing bigger and bigger in my mouth. No, I thought, I must be imagining it. It seemed to be filling my mouth and curling back of its own accord. It happened so fast and suddenly, I couldn't breathe at all. My airways were obstructed, and I couldn't make a sound. I was suffocating silently. Somewhere in my mind I realized that a faint gurgling in the room was me. My heart banged in terror. I felt trapped in a waking nightmare. I thought that I had seconds to live. Somewhere, some old wives' tale about using a spoon to stop someone choking on their tongue flashed into my mind. It was all I could think of to do. Staggering to the kitchen, I grabbed a spoon, forced it into my mouth, and tried to free my airwaves. David found me lying in the kitchen, barely conscious with the spoon in my mouth. My face was molten black from lack of oxygen. "Oh God, John. Hold on, John. Hold on," he cried. "I'm calling an ambulance. I'll be right back. Just hold on." Neither of us had brought mobile phones in Germany, so he made a panic dash downstairs to use Hildegard's house phone. She was away that weekend, and he discovered that she had unplugged the phone and locked it away in case we might use it. He ran out onto the street in desperation. "Please, please, someone help me," he pleaded. "Someone call an ambulance. It's an emergency." He had no German, and most people in the northwestern city of Bremen didn't speak English. Nevertheless, a few good Samaritans followed the frenzied-looking man up the stairs, and once they saw me on the floor, they called an ambulance. By the time the paramedics arrived, the worst of the symptoms had receded. I was petrified, but at least I could nearly breathe again. The paramedics indicated for me to breathe into a brown paper bag. They thought I was like David, and I didn't speak German. "Mit ihm ist nichts falsch," said one of the paramedics to everyone gathered around him. "Es ist alles in seinem Kopf." "There's nothing wrong with him," he said. "It's all in his head." Then they packed up and left. David and I gazed at each other in shock and terror. He was pale-faced and as traumatized as I was. He raged at the dismissive response of the paramedics. "I just don't understand. Why won't anyone just listen to you?" he said. "Jesus, I couldn't believe the colour of you. I was convinced that you were going to die in me. Why won't they do something?" I felt sure I was going to die too. I knew I had almost choked to death that night. I heard a clock start to tick over my head, and it was ticking down. Call it intuition, sixth sense, or anything you want. I felt like I didn't have a lot of time. I just couldn't figure out what to do about it. I knew that this thing was going to kill me, whatever it was, if I didn't get it first.